There's a game called Civilization where you get your own little nation. Be immortal, rule as you see fit.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to a new episode of Chatting with Lady C. Hello Mom, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, honey. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Oh, good, good. You're looking particularly dashing today.
Thank you. See, you're not wearing a brooch today.
No, because I'm wearing this with these, and I think a brooch would be a bit much, don't you?
Oh no, I've just got used to seeing you with a brooch.
I know, but I thought it would be overkill, you know, so.
Alright, so for our first question today, do you agree with Richard Littlejohn that the government's latest COVID restrictions are an unprecedented threat to the civil liberties?
So, do I think that this government's policy regarding COVID is an unprecedented threat to civil liberties? Yes, I do. I agree with Richard Littlejohn. The government has gone too far. It's gone further than it has ever gone, even in wartime. If their policies made sense, which they do not, this bubble of six and all of that nonsense, we need to have competent advice, and we need to have a government that has the cojones to understand that even if it's going to be criticized for certain actions, it needs to act responsibly. The problem with the world today, and governments in particular, is that most people have been cosseted, so cosseted in the Western world for the last 40 years, with their privileges having been converted into rights, that people and governments actually are now, also because of the internet, terrified of adverse public opinion, which is ludicrous. I mean, we need somebody like Mrs. Thatcher who's going to be man enough to say no, no, no. I have to say, I'm not a scientist, but I am intelligent, and I read what intelligent people have to say, and I have no axe to grind, and it doesn't matter how popular or unpopular I am. I'm not going to be selling my soul to the devil to get a vote in a few years. And it's obvious that Professor Carol Sikora has got the handle on the situation. And I think that the government should be listening to people like him. You know, there are all sorts of backstories, and there are all sorts of dynamics going on behind the scenes with government advisors who do not support the government, who are hoping to undermine the government, who are giving bad advice for political reasons, who are supposed scientists but have a very political agendas. There are all sorts of considerations going on. Sasha Swire, in her book, The Diary of an MP's Wife, makes a very valid point. 90% of what goes on in government goes on behind the scenes. There is no justification for the government to behave the way they're behaving. The COVID figures show, first of all, COVID is not like Ebola. It is not customarily deadly. Most people who get it are not going to die of it. Why should the whole world be locked down to preserve a few people's lives? It does not make sense. It is an encroachment on the civil liberties of everybody who is effectively being imprisoned. And the government is now threatening all sorts of draconian measures and fines and invasiveness. And you know, anybody who's sophisticated and educated and has read history knows you give power to government at your peril, because most governments and most people in government are about power. They want power to control, they want power to regulate, they want power to do all the things that really are antithetical to civil liberties. Now, I'm not saying that I'm against an orderly society, because I think we need an orderly society. But we certainly need COVID regulations that are sensible. For instance, this rule of 6, it has no scientific basis. The figures show that 50% of COVID infections emanate from schools and universities. A further 25% emanate from care centres. That is 75% of COVID cases. You know, why is the world being shut down to preserve and why are pubs, the entertainment and hospitality sector, has 3 to 4% infection rate? Why is that being shut down? Now, I'm not saying it because we have a wedding and events venue. I'm saying it because it's ludicrous. You know, I do not think that schools should be shut down either. I think that we are going to seriously damage our younger generation if they are not sent to school and socialized. If it becomes so apparent that the children are endangered by being in school, they may actually seriously consider having boarding situations in much the same way that in wartime they had evacuation situations. But these are things that are intelligent responses, not unintelligent responses, that the government is implementing things so that they can have been seen to be doing something, when what they're doing is actually buggering it up royally. And so, yes, I think Richard Littlejohn, who I've only met once or twice, I have to tell you, but he is very intelligent, he's very sensible, he's very solid and sound, and I do not agree with everything he says, but I certainly agree with him in this instance. And I think if the government keeps on going at the rate it's going, it is inviting civil strife. And I, for one, would be in favour.
Well, it's already started.
Well, yeah, but it starts with the wrong things and for the wrong causes and with the wrong people. You know, while the law-abiding, you, me, and everybody else who's law-abiding is imprisoned, you have all of those who are not law-abiding, you know, Extinction Rebellion, Black Lives Matter, you know, protesting, 200, 300,000 people, nothing's done to them, but somebody who's 7 people getting together, they're going to be fined hundreds, if not thousands of pounds. I mean, the whole thing is insanity, you know. I think Boris really either should, if he's been affected by COVID, he needs to step aside. The problem is we need somebody who's really competent and sensible and has the courage of his convictions and will do things that are unpopular. Boris is too much really of a publicity whore, you know. He loves good publicity. He wants everybody to love him. And I'm afraid it's, in terms of COVID, he is cocking it up royally. I think we need sensible policies.
Well, like the tubes and all that, so you're not allowed to meet up at 6 people at a restaurant or in the park, but you can be 20 stuffed into a tube to go to work.
Or 40.
And there are a lot more key workers than there were at the beginning of this.
Yes.
Because restaurants are still allowed to work until certain hours. So those people that weren't working are actually now working. So there's a whole load of more people out there working.
Yeah.
So there's more people using using public transport. So it makes no sense of keeping these people away from these people when they're still going to be together in one situation.
Yes, absolutely right.
It's like the domes as well. I'm sorry, this little girl snitched in her domes because she says, "Oh, they've locked us down in our domes." But that's just made all these teenagers love it because they're not going to school or anything. They're locked in their domes and going to each other's domes and having parties. How's that keeping the COVID situation under control? He's just trying to make everybody do the
I
same.
get that if they are in their dormitories and they're locked into their dormitories, that they can't spread it. So I get that.
They're spreading it among each other.
Each other.
And then when they go back home, they're spreading it towards their family. That's going to spread
But
it to them.
that's why
too.
they're locked down, and I can see some sense in that. I can see absolutely no sense in the rule of 6, and I can see absolutely no sense in at 10 o'clock everything shuts down. So the pubs are now opening at 10 o'clock in the morning.
They're always open at 10 in the morning. Like they say, you never see an Englishman without a pint before 11. So they're well open if you think.
So anyway, so that's it.
No, I think they need to, like you say, he needs to put somebody in a bit more aggressiveness to it and just let's fall
and
or
the
rise.
government needs to understand that the responsibility of the government is to govern. It is not to look at polls of popularity and to dread unpopular actions. It is to govern. This government is early in its term. It's a fixed term parliament. They're here for another 4 years. They are in an ideal position to take unpopular measures now that will gain them criticism. The problem is we live in a world where the media and social media, everybody has an opinion, everybody has a voice, everybody's busy articulating, and that's to the good. What is not to the good is the government deciding that, they are going to implement policies that are contrary to good sense because they're worried about being criticised. And so shall we get on to the next question?
I do have to just say one thing. It's just
Yes.
that there's no freedom of rights for us. It's you obey or you get a fine. And I think that's just ridiculous.
Well, this again is something else because, actually, that's what civil liberties are all about. We should have the right to choose. it's obvious,
I agree, we should choose. If you feel comfortable going out, you should be able to go
That's
out.
right.
If you feel a bit scared, then stay home.
That's right. It couldn't be simpler, and I think everybody should be encouraged to behave responsibly. But of course, successive governments in the last 40 years have divested people of their feelings of responsibility to court their vote and say, oh, well, we'll be responsible. No, the government is not responsible for the city, for the people. The people are responsible for their own actions, I think we really need a recalibration, and in some way COVID might turn out to be a good thing because the Western societies have done what all decadent societies have done, and we are in the decadent phase of our civilization. If you say take ancient Rome or ancient Greece, everybody starts out poor, and then a few people make it, and then the arc goes like that, and then it starts to go like, it can plateau like for 1,000 years. For instance, the Roman civilization, ancient Roman Empire, it didn't collapse until 1453 in the East. And so it took a long time to collapse, but it started to collapse. Societies, the key to when they start to decay is when they convert the privileges of their citizens into rights. It happened in ancient Rome, it's happened in our society, and it will happen if in any other society that should succeed this. It will happen. Next question.
Nice. For our next question today, do you think George Soros is a hero or a monster?
Well pronounced, my dear, because most people, of course, say George Soros, and of course it is Soros, because it's Hungarian, like George Schulte. Do I think he's a hero or a monster? I think that George Soros is a tremendously accomplished man who has achieved a very great deal, who is very intent on leaving a legacy, that for all his desire for it to be positive will always be mixed, because George Soros is the man who has broken several economies during his reign as an emperor of finance. He gave no thought to the damage that he was wreaking to the societies or to the citizens of those societies, as he manipulated money markets, took advantage of situations that made him a vast amount of money. We're speaking about billions. I know a little bit about him personally, although I don't know him personally, because he was a great friend of Andrea Plunket, who some of you might know as Andrea Reynolds. She was one of the main characters in Reversal of Fortune, because at the time it was a famous movie that was made with Jeremy Irons playing the part of Klaus von Bülow, who was tried twice. He was tried, and Andrea was his girlfriend, and she is the one who helped with Alan Dershowitz to get him off. And he was found not guilty the second time, but the first time he was found guilty. And he and Andrea had once been romantically involved, and they were like this. They were both Hungarians, great friends. And I will just tell this little vignette because I think it reveals an awful lot about George Soros as a person. Andrea was married to Shaun Plunket, who was one of the Queen's 3 foster brothers, so called because Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and King George VI tucked them under their wings when the 3 boys' parents died in a plane crash in 1938. They were great friends of the Yorks, who became King George VI and Queen Elizabeth. And to her credit, Queen Elizabeth took good charge of them. They were often staying at Windsor. They often stayed, and I know to my certain knowledge, because I've seen the invitations, etc., that every single party of any importance, even minor parties of importance, small parties, relatively speaking, that the Queen had, she'd always asked Shaun and Andrea, and before that, his previous wives. Now this I was told by Shaun and Andrea, in, I suppose, the early 2000s, they had moved to New York, and they were running a very upmarket bread and breakfast. And Shaun forgot to send in the insurance papers, and the major part of their operation burned down. Do you know George Soros, even though he knew that Andrea was so challenged financially, that she would dress in mittens and hats and wouldn't turn on the heating. She had dignity, she wasn't begging for anything from anybody, but he could have written her a check for $500,000. He never did. So there was this man, and there is he still, going around saying, I care so much about everybody, I don't know that I am going to fund all sorts of movements that he calls pro-democracy movements that are, according to his detractors, very left-wing, and that they are supposedly, whether it's true or not, they fund people to undermine the structure of various governments. And he is into power. He was into making money and the power that you get. And he's one of the richest men on earth. Is he a hero or a monster? I would say he has been monstrously successful. He has behaved heroically in financial terms, but I would not call him a hero. I would say that his legacy is as mixed as his reactions have always been to the suffering of those who were not going to somehow benefit him in some long-term goal. The man is a visionary. He does have vision. His humanity, how can you be humane when you stand by and see one of your oldest and closest friends on her uppers, practically freezing in New York, where it gets really cold in winter, and it's upstate New York as well, and don't even help her out when you are worth so many billions. And you most likely kid yourself with, oh, well, I don't want to hurt her feelings or step on her dignity. I'm sorry if that's his excuse. It's a very thin one. And I also think that somebody who has wrought so much financial damage over the years to hundreds of millions of people is now trying to secure his legacy by being pro-democracy. I'm sorry. I'm not convinced. What do you think of what I've just said about this man?
I think he doesn't sound... He sounds like he's made it, but if you had a friend in need, or a family friend in need, or any sort of person that you know that you're very close to, you should help them.
Absolutely.
And if you say he's a billionaire and she had a bit of financial problems, even like £1,000 would have probably helped her out.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yeah. So, next question, honey.
So for our final question for this video, do you think Prince Charles has gone too far in interfering recently with the governmental plans to tackle climate change?
I think, yes, Prince Charles has gone too far. I think Prince Charles is very rapidly approaching the stage where he might be king. Prince Charles has always been something of an activist in various terms. I think Prince Charles is not as intelligent as he believes he is. He does surround himself with some good thinkers. His father is certainly a lot more intelligent than he is. I think Prince Charles is very well-meaning, but I do think when Prince Charles tries to lever the climate change issue and link it to penalties, which is what he's been trying to do and positioning himself to do, I think he's gone too far. I am not a scientist, but I have read enough to know that climate change is a natural phenomenon related to many things, the least of which is what the politicians and the climate change activists are trying to tell us is man-made. Yes, some of it is man-made, and we certainly should deal with certain things, for instance, plastics. We should aim to reduce gas emissions. We should aim to have vehicles run off some eco-friendly fuel. These are things that we can and should do. But you know, the climate change lobby is yet again, it's an old story with a new cast. Well, let me stick to one famous thing, actually. The plagues that were visited by Jehovah on the Israelites because they were faithless. The plague of locusts, etc., etc., etc. These are all recorded without any doubt in the Old Testament. The Jewish priests and scholars believed that these were punishments from God, when in fact every single thing was due to a volcanic eruption that had taken place elsewhere. So we nowadays have the scientists cloaked in the robes of the priests, saying, "You are very naughty, you drove a car, you did X, Y, Z, A, B, and C." They completely ignore the fact that there are hundreds of volcanic eruptions every year, that volcanic ash spewing into the atmosphere does far more damage to the environment than anything we as human beings can come up with, because this gives the scientists the power that the priests used to have. And we now live in no longer a theocratic world. We now live in a scientific world and a political world. So the scientists and the politicians have jumped on this bandwagon, and you have gullible people like the Prince of Wales, who really does not have the intellectual ability to sift through to the extent that he would actually be able to come to a considered opinion of his own. You know, he's always been well known to mouth the words of the last expert in whose company he's been. And he's got his chosen experts that he's comfortable with. But the fact of the matter is that climate change is a natural thing. To a large extent, it is beyond the control of man. It has always been, it will always be. And I will rest my case by suggesting to everybody that they Google the Green Sahara and the phenomenon by which for a period of about 6,000 years, from say BC 1500 to BC 900 or whatever, 11 to 7 or 5 or whatever, it's a period of some substance because of a shift on the orbital axis of this Earth, because this Earth keeps on shifting and in relation to everything else around it, in particular the sun and the moon. And these shifts take place over a period of several thousand years. So we had the Green Sahara. The Sahara is the richest, most plentiful art museum on Earth. It has tens of thousands of artifacts, of pictures, paintings, engravings, carvings, in the deepest, darkest desert, which show that for several thousand years the Sahara had huge lakes, lakes the size of almost Lake Baikal in Russia, vast lakes. It had lush pastures, it had huge populations, relatively speaking. Then there was an orbital shift, and the Sahara ceased to be green, and it became the desert that it now is. This caused tremendous problems for well over a millennium in various parts of the world. Nowadays, of course, they'd be telling you, oh, it's because, you have driven your car into the city of London, and you should have been on a bike, and therefore it's all your fault. Well, it's nothing to do with it. I mean, another little example before we go is in the reign of Henry II, his wife Eleanor, who was the Duchess of Aquitaine in her own right, and he owned vast territories in France. He was the King of England, but really his French territories were much vaster than his English territories. England was one of the chief wine-producing regions of France. We now again have started to produce wine according to what they used to say, global warming. Well, of course, they've also stopped saying global warming because every time they measure the temperature, it's actually cooling rather than rising. They can't say global warming, so it's now climate change. But they are trying to impose really rather restrictive, senseless theories that are supposed to dupe the public into being as malleable as most leaders want the public to be. We need to understand most governments want to govern, they want to control, they want to rule. They will try any trick in the book. Now, I am not saying that a conscionable government doesn't have some belief, and I'm not saying that all politicians are crooks and that all politicians are scam artists, but all politicians want to rule. They're into power. And if it suits them to believe that man has control over his environment, they are going to believe it. And we don't have control over our environment, I'm afraid, to any large extent. And if you doubt me, just go into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when there is a hurricane brewing, and let's see how powerful man is. And on that note, I think I rest my case.
It's just like the ice caps. A lot of people are saying, oh, it's global warming that's melting it. But in many documentaries, they're showing like, oh, in 100 years, it's melted like this much, and in half that time, with our generation, it's melted 4 times. Well, in this documentary that somebody pointed out, because he's a person that just points out these little things, in the documentary, they didn't tell in the documentary that there was an underwater volcano erupting, and that's why this ice cap was melting faster. So it's, like you say, it's natural things. We have underwater volcanoes in the Antarctic that erupt under the water that melt Antarctic, sorry.
It was in the Antarctic.
Yes, and it melts the ice caps. So and in this documentary, it's very funny.
Well,
like they forget to they didn't tell
this
you this
is a
bit.
brilliant. Thank you, honey. That's a brilliant point to make. Mwah, I'm so proud of my baby boy. Mwah.
But that's the thing. A lot of people believe what they see, and they don't do their own research. And this is what I love about people that show you what you've seen and tells you the truth.
Well, this is where the internet is invaluable. It is the...
I hate doing researches now. I do have to say, just on that point, when I'm just trying to find something very simple, it's all these different things that when I was younger, you wrote, oh, how do I change a pipe? It was like that. Now you've got 50,000 ways of changing a pipe. No, you just need to cut it, weld it, and you're done.
Well, this again is confusion. Choice creates confusion. Too much choice can create chaos unless you have a disciplined mind, and the internet nevertheless is the great ancient library of Alexandria brought back to life. The internet is a gift from God, actually from Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who really is the father of the internet and the creator of all of this in a major way. And he, for the good of mankind, did not monetize it. Otherwise, he would now be the richest man who has ever lived. Was that not commendable of him?
Definitely.
And I think we're very lucky to live in the age that we do, for all the sifting that we have to do to get through to the gold. This is the most magical age to live in, because we have so much choice and so much knowledge and so much opportunity, and more people have more opportunities than they have ever had historically throughout the whole of civilization. And I think that's a great, great cause for hope. What do you think?
I do.
Thank you.
What you just said about this gentleman has been a great cause that's given internet to everybody, and that's amazing. And you see, this is what I love about Taiwan, is that they've understood that everybody needs internet nowadays, so they've given their country free Wi-Fi to their people. Isn't that amazing? And this is many years ago, but I always pick it up because I think it's such a great thing that even us that use internet daily, that you actually need to be on internet every second of your day for a lot of business companies as well, and we pay for it still, when it should be something nowadays where you would think it should be free for everyone.
Well, that's for another time. Thank you so much for being such a good presenter.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you, honey.
Nice. Well, thank you everybody, and we hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please hit the like button, subscribe and share with your friends. Thank you very much and have a good day. Bye bye.